whereas maybe 200 years ago, certainly in Europe, there was an aristocratic class who ran Europe. Now there's a political class, and of course they have complete control over public service broadcasting over here. The BBC is funded and paid for by the same people, and they promulgate the same view that we should be internationally governed, and so it leaves democracy completely behind.
And let's be clear, you have a bureaucracy that sets the policies, and then all the elected parliament that's represented by the different nations, all you can do is basically amend or debate smaller sections. So literally, the once sovereign nations of Europe and England have been turned into vestigial ceremonial offices.
This is quite true, and of course it's totally against our Constitution. What a lot of Americans, and I visit America quite a lot, and I love to do so, they don't fully understand that we do actually have a Constitution in Britain. We do have something called the Bill of Rights, which was formulated in 1688, so it's several hundred years old.
Yeah, you have the Parliament Act, too, don't you? And then even before that, Magna Carta.
We do, and if you go back to 1215, of course, you go quite rightly, Alex, back to Magna Carta. So we've had 1,000 years nearly of developing a parliamentary constitutional democracy under a constitutional monarchy.
That, by the way, for those that don't know, was bought with a lot of blood and a lot of heroics that was then the model for our system here in the United States.
Well, that's quite right. We fought to preserve a constitutional democratic monarchy in many, many wars, and of course, in the last century, alongside the United States as our great ally. And I'm a great believer in the transatlantic alliance between our two nations because we think alike and we believe in the same things. But the problem with us is that we've discarded our Constitution, and I noticed almost on a yearly basis the same thing is happening to America. You've discarded your Constitution, and we regard, as certainly thinking people over here, regard the American Constitution as one of the greatest documents ever written.
It's amazing. They're getting rid of due process. Secret arrest is being implemented. Warrantless spying. All the same systems we see in Europe, England, are being implemented in the U.S. The bureaucracies even give the programs the same names. This is all being internationally organized, and 5 members of our Supreme Court have said in the last 2 years that they will follow UN courts above our courts when this is a despotism we have in Brussels, a despotism we have in Manhattan. Now Obama has signed an executive order saying Interpol has diplomatic immunity in the U.S. above even our own FBI. I want to talk about what it's like living under this tyranny with our guest and how we fight back against it. Godfrey Bloom is our guest. He's an economist, and he's on the extremely powerful committees in the European Union Parliament. Stay with us.
A rebel. Here that build the big guns. Here that build the death planes.
Godfrey Bloom, member of the European Union Parliament, with us for the rest of the hour. Website's Godfrey Bloom, MEP.co.uk. Sir, it does seem, though, that as the European Union, unelected, tries to take power, tries to abuse people, more and more countries are voting to not expand their power, though they just keep coming back with referendums till they do. It looks like Greece and other countries may go bankrupt under the EU. I mean, there's more and more talk of the EU falling apart. A, is that accurate? B, should we hope for that? I mean, how do we combat these people?
Well, we've got some of the problems we have is in the differences of law that we have in the United States and the United Kingdom. We have 3 main pillars of our legal system. That is the presumption of innocence, trial by jury, and the concept of habeus corpus, i.e. the state can't lock somebody up without giving them a proper trial and a judicial system. Now, we've taken over, or the European Union has taken over something called the Napoleonic Code, which doesn't embody any of these things. And our Supreme Court, which was in fact the House of Lords, that was our final court of appeal legally, has been taken over by the European Court of Justice, which outranks that now under a completely different system of law. They have a prescriptive system of law. And where these two things are extremely different, and this is something that your listeners need to understand because this is where it all begins, the system that we have in the United Kingdom, and largely the same in the United States of America, is that the legal system tells you that which you may not do. So there are a book of rules of things that you cannot do, which we would all accept is fundamentally fair. Now, the system of government that's come into Europe, and I think is coming into the United States, is a system which tells you that which you can do, a prescriptive legal system, which is extremely dangerous and extremely sinister. We do not want the government of the day to tell us what we can do. We just want a small book of rules. And if I may just use a little analogy, which I often use here, which will help your listeners understand the point that I'm making, is that those of your listeners with children, teenage children, probably say, as we do in England, look, there are half a dozen things you can't do in your room. You know, you can't smoke, you can't play loud music, no members of opposite sex late at night, whatever. Probably half a dozen fairly sensible rules. But apart from that, the room belongs to, the teenager, and it's their space. And I think that's the way we've always wanted to work in our two countries. If you start telling them kids what they can do, you have a completely legalistic and prescriptive system which nobody wants. And, of course, that means you actually lose that concept of freedom under the law, which we all value so highly. And you rightly said earlier, Alex, so many young men have died for over the last 100 years.
It's amazing. But expanding on this, was it not a grievous blow? Was it a mortal blow to have their Copenhagen Treaty blow up in their face? Or, as Gordon Brown's saying, hey, we've always been an unelected bureaucracy. We'll just go ahead and write up the agreement, and we'll start monitoring countries, whether they like it or not, and we'll start taxing the England, the European Union, and the U.S., and we'll take that money and give it to these private banks to go out and buy off countries to go ahead and go along with it. I mean, they show what tyrants they are in that even though the Copenhagen thing fell apart, they're still going ahead with it.
There's nothing that the modern political class seems to take notice of ordinary voters. They don't seem to care about what ordinary people think. Now, for example, my party, the United Kingdom Independence Party, at the last European election on June the 4th, came second over the whole country in the United Kingdom. And you know very well over there how difficult it is to start a new political party. It's almost impossible in a two-party system in the United Kingdom and the United States. But